Good morning. Welcome to the University of Minnesota. Welcome to the Weisman Art Museum. I'm Lyndall King. I'm the director and chief curator here, and I'm very happy to welcome you. I'm going to speak fast because we only have an hour for this program, and I don't want to take up the time from the artists and from Rebecca. We're going to be having a discussion this morning, particularly regarding women in the Mingei movement and in ceramics as ceramic artists generally. So I want to start by saying the store will open at 9:30, so you'll have time, and there's a collector's tour coming at 10. The galleries will be open by then. And we have a couple of books that I hope you'll be interested in. This is the book that was just published with our new show in the Ceramics Gallery, Persistence of Mingei, and all of the artists here on stage are featured in this book. And then we have another one, which was from a year or so ago. It's about the 25th anniversary of the St. Croix Valley Pottery Tour. So it has lots of wonderful photographs in it of ceramic artists who, all the artists who've been in the Pottery Tour in the last 25 years are featured in this group, in this book, not just the hosts. So hope you'll take a look at those in our store before you leave. And now I want to introduce Rebecca Sive, who's an inspirational and powerful speaker on women and leadership. She's among the feminists who changed America, published by the University of Illinois Press in 2006, and author of lots of books and articles. Her most recent book is Vote Her In, Your Guide to Electing Our First Woman President. So let's give a shout out for that. It's a practical handbook, and I think I haven't got it yet, but I'm definitely going to get it as soon as I can, right after this conference is over. But she talks about how every woman can take part in achieving that success and benefiting from it. So at the University of Chicago, the Harris School of Public Policy, she was a lecturer and program and academic director of its program for women in public leadership. She is also, and perhaps most importantly, an avid collector of contemporary ceramics. I've seen her collection, and it's stunning, outstanding, that's what I can say. She recently wrote and published a book on her collection of Linda Sikora's work, and I would say that her collection does feature many, many works by women ceramic artists. So her commitment to women ceramicists was recently the subject of a feature story in American Craft. So I want to welcome Rebecca, who will introduce our artists and will be the moderator for our discussion this morning. So Rebecca.
I think I might need to quit while I'm ahead here, because we are graced to be here, and thank you for that, Lyndall. And I'm graced, I think, particularly to be with this group of wonderful women whose work I've admired for decades. So I'm going to just say thank you also, in addition to Lyndall and her team and the museum, for being enthusiastic about this. I want to personally thank at the very beginning here Leslie Farron, who deserves all the credit for promoting this idea to all of us and pushing us to put it together and be here today. So, but for Leslie. There are, I want to just describe the logistics to you, and before I do, to mention that Studio Potter helped us with this project. I know Eleanor's here, and we're glad to have them with us. Thank you, Eleanor. And there are materials we invited the artists to bring materials today to share with you. One of the sort of not so hidden agendas of this project is to promote women and their work, and so we said bring cards, bring flyers, and in the trying to lead by example, or just being the promoter that I am, I brought flyers about my book and podcast. So as you leave and make your way to the bookstore to get those wonderful books, please stop at the registration table and pick up all this literature and put it in your Claytopia bags. So I want to just tell you what the plan is. We do just have an hour, and we see this as the beginning of a long-term process of our community engaging on the topic of women in the ceramics world, celebrating their work, advancing their work, making sure women artists get their due. So we have an hour, but this is one of hundreds of hours, we hope, on the going forward. And also, it will be a celebration of every woman who chooses to participate in this life, along with the 6 who are able to be here. Unfortunately, Linda Sikora could not be here, but she's here in spirit and asked me to give her regards to everybody. So what we're going to do, and I'm not a TV watcher, but I heard this expression, lightning round. So what we're going to do is have a sort of lightning round to just give you a little preview of each of the artists' thoughts about the topic of women and Mingei. And we're not worrying here, Sandi Simon, about, happily so, about any one person's definition of the term, but looking to just explore this concept and how these artists see their work within it and within this exhibit that Randy so brilliantly curated. So after that, so that'll take us approximately 20 minutes, we'll open for questions, and I think that I'll take the privilege of the moderator if I have any questions to sort of start things off, but then the goal here is for us all to be engaged and then to go on to the rest of our week together and our conversation. So I decided, in the interest of being a sort of community organizer by training, as well as a historian, that I'm just going to call on the artists in alphabetical order. And I thought that was probably the fairest thing to do, although with a last name, with a letter at the end of the alphabet, I kind of wish sometimes we'd start in the reverse. But that's what we'll do. And there are 4 mics here, I believe, so I think we're set. And just thank you all for being here, and we'll get started. I have my little phone here. And so Margaret Bohls is going to start. And I think for those of you who, I imagine everyone here knows the artists. I guess what I'm going to, we don't have really time for bios, but study who these women are if by any chance you don't know who they are, which I can't even imagine. So Margaret will start, and then we'll continue on through the alphabet and then open it up. So Margaret, thank you for being here. It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. I wrote this down because I knew that we had limited time. I wanted to thank Randy Johnston for including me in this exhibition, and the staff of the Weisman Museum, and especially Leslie Farron for organizing this. However, the truth is I really have no direct connection to the Mingei, either through my education or through my studio practice. And so that's my disclaimer. I did teach at the University of Minnesota for about 13 years, and I developed a history of ceramics class while I was teaching there. And so I do teach my students about the history of the Mingei movement and their connection to contemporary artists, especially in Minnesota. I developed the class here at the University of Minnesota and still teach it at the University of Nebraska. I traveled to Japan since I've lived in Nebraska with my friend who brings students on study abroad there. So I went to the house of Kawai Kanjuro. I went to the Mingei Museum, which is at the home of Soetsu Yanagi. And I'm really slowly learning about the history of Japanese and Korean pottery, which is a big subject. But this was never part of my formal education. So I'm coming to an understanding of the Mingei as an educator as opposed to as a maker. So since I began teaching the history of ceramics, my work in the studio has almost always begun with the study of a particular set of historical forms, which I think is similar to the way in which the Mingei artists began. And I do have a deep love of modernism. And so in all of its form, arts and crafts movement, the Bauhaus, Art Nouveau, Art Deco, mid-century design. And so I am really interested in the connection between the Mingei and those other movements that I consider all of them to sort of be part of modernism. So, thank you.
And now we turn to Linda Christensen. I hope you all had a chance to see these fabulous slides as we were coming in of the work. Linda.
Okay, well, I wish I had written mine down a little better now. Oh, yeah. Well, thank you, everyone that's been mentioned. I won't use my time listing everyone, but thank you all. And thank you for being here, all of you in the audience as well. My connection with Mingei is really not about the culture of Mingei. I guess it's really about the aesthetics. And what I mean by that is what I have always chosen to pay attention to, things I look at, starting from, I guess, childhood to the present, the things that catch my attention. I think that's really my connection. It's about seeing, and to me, seeing is really everything. And in a way, it brings up the existential question, why bother to make anything when there are so many beautiful things to look at in the natural world and in the, I guess, the human-made world as well. But really, to me, that's the existential question that I struggle with. Why bother at all? So if you decide to bother with it, then, that leads to other questions. But that's really it. And I think growing up for me, I grew up in a really ugly home. I would call it ugly with ugly things in it. And I had a beautiful family with ideas, and we had an intellectual life, but I wouldn't say we had a beautiful life with things around us. But once I stepped outside the door, things were beautiful, very beautiful to me. And I was always trying to make sense of that sort of polar problem, the existential problem, really. So I was delighted to go away to school, and there I was fortunate. I really wasn't exposed to Mingei, but my first teacher was supposed to be Nils Lu, but he was in jail. So Mark Ferris was brought in just for a semester, and that was my initial exposure, I guess that's my lineage. And we had Treadle Wheels. We had Leach's book. That was our textbook. But then Mark left, and we had other teachers that had other ideas. And not really other books, but Mingei was not something I really knew anything about. But what I fell in love with was the link between daily life and art, that art could be combined with daily life. And that was sort of what I was missing in my childhood. I had a beautiful life with my family in nature, hiking, skiing, trapping, looking at those things. Those were beautiful things. But in our home, that was really missing. So that, I guess, would maybe be a connection to Mingei, having beautiful things in your home that you use, your socks, whatever. So the existential question then, why bother to make anything? And that was very difficult for me in school. I felt adrift. Who am I in this world? And when I got out on my own and I had my dream come true studio, I had a little crappy Korean kick wheel that you had to kick all the time, and stiff clay, and it was horrible. And I thought, what can I make? This is horrible. I can't do this. And is my 3 minutes up? Okay, okay. It's up. It's up.
So I hope you all understand that, you know, we don't have a lot of time and we want to hear from everybody. And I had to I'm going to look at you and say your 3 minutes are up. So I'm so grateful to everyone, Linda, for doing that. And then, of course, we'll have all the time in the world later this afternoon and as we go around this week to talk to each other. So the next person who's going to chat with us is Marin Klopman.
Thank you. So thanks for having us. Thanks for having me. And I just want to say, first up, it's incredible to be with all of you and how we connect differently through the history. I connect to the concept of Mingei through my work ethic and through my history. I was introduced to ceramics as an apprentice right out of high school in Germany. And we were actually trained to create Bavarian folk pottery from the late 1800s. At that point, I hadn't heard anything about Mingei, but I realized later we really were doing art for the people, and we were, as apprentices, unknown craftsmen, women. And I went on, when I came to the United States, to study at Kansas City Art Institute. And that's where I met Rhonda Johnston, who came for a sabbatical replacement for Victor Babu. And it was Randy who introduced me to the concept of Mingei as it developed and how it connects to Warren Mackenzie's philosophy. Randy's passion for pots and his style of teaching also brought me to Minnesota, even though Randy wasn't teaching at the U of M, brought me to this area. Warren had already retired, and ultimately Mark Ferris became my main teacher here. I met Warren through the community, through wood firings at Randy and Jan's, and through Northern Clay Center, where I was an intern and then later worked. I also fired Warren's soda kiln for 7 years, so I really got close to him and got really exposed to his philosophy. And even though I was doing very different work, we really had great conversation about the studio practice and the power of the repetition and the daily interaction with similar or same forms. So the St. Croix potters were, during and after graduate school, a really big influence for me. And I did the two actually for 2 years, and so their work ethic through conversations and that exposure really had an impression on me. And I really knew I wanted to become a studio artist versus going into teaching. Like the St. Croix potters, I wanted to set up shop in the country. It was very romantic and intriguing, but I grew up in the city, so I realized after a while that was not really my path. And I ended up choosing Lucy Ree and Ruth Duckworth specifically as women potters, role models, to set up a city studio. And you didn't need to have land, with other words, to be a potter and to be a successful artist. So fast forward, I did pottery throughout that whole time, and 12 years ago I changed towards wall sculpture. And what basically connects for me to Mingei and the studio practice even to this day is that when I make an installation and I make 70 parts that are of the same shape, it brings me always back to Warren, because the repetition of making one shape over and over, his idea was always, as a humble potter, only the next shape I make is better than the one I just made. And so you have that beautiful progression, and it's also through that repetition, and I'm sure you can relate to that, you get to new shapes. You gradually, through your own process of repetition, move forward. And so I just want to say, even Mingei very much connects to functional pottery. Ultimately, the idea of having a persistent studio practice, it doesn't matter if you make wall sculpture or tiles The repetition of it, the engagement with it, the commitment to it is ultimately what counts. And you got to find what you're really passionate about, and that's what keeps you going and creates the studio practice that you can sustain over a long period of time.
Thank you, Maren.
I guess we're sharing this.
And Jan.
This is not a normal place for me to be. So I'm trying to respect the parameters, and ultimately I decided I would just read, because without that I digress into 3 million different avenues of ideas and thoughts. So I'm going to go with this. I really did want to acknowledge how much of an honor it is to be sitting with these women
Yes.
today, and that's really the primary reason that I agreed to come, because I feel in their commitment to ceramics, in their own work, and also through their teaching, they have contributed amazing things to this field of ceramics. I also wanted to thank Rebecca and Leslie. At first, it was really difficult for me to agree to sit here, but it has been an incredibly challenging 3-minute assignment. One that really has made me uncomfortable, and I think that's a good thing. And I've learned a lot. I actually read The Unknown Craftsman for the first time in my life. Due to technology, I didn't benefit from a lot of the helpful things that I know they sent us. So despite some reading in an attempt to give informed and intelligent answers, the answers I'm sharing come from my own personal experience and heart. I must honor Warren McKenzie today. I feel he's the reason we're all here. Without his influence and presence in our lives, we would not be making what we are today. I totally am with Maren. Warren's with me every day in the studio. So I was introduced to the Mingei spirit by Warren and McKeachie-Johnston in the late 1970s. They modeled the appreciation and integration of art and craft into my everyday life. Part of my definition of Mingei is surrounding oneself with handmade objects originating in the heart and the eye, then expressed through the hand and appreciated through use. Mingei to me is an idea, a connective spirit which allows individual freedom of interpretation. As exhibited by the diversity represented in this exhibition, there's obviously room for everyone in the concept of Mingei. As Rob Silberman states in his essay in the catalog, the popularity of Mingei no doubt relies on its ability to offer a seemingly neat set of beliefs and practices, yet retain flexibility. So, yeah, I thought that was pretty profound. What I believe we should be celebrating today is our diversity within the Mingei spirit. Yeah, I have always felt supported and often solicited to participate professionally in the ceramic community by my husband Randy and many others, both male and female. I believe there's been significant change in gender recognition in the time of my 40 years of being a ceramic artist, and I embrace that wholeheartedly and hope that it continues. So,
Thank you.
there you go.
Sandi Simon, our West Coast representative.
There you go. I was with the University of Minnesota, and Warren was my teacher along with Kurt Hord in 1967, 68, and 69. And I was fortunate enough to be with a very energetic group of people. It was during the Vietnam War as well. So there were more students than ever before had entered the university to avoid the draft. And Randy Johnson was one, Wayne Branham, Mark Ferris, Gib Crone, and there were women. But they, for some reason, none of them were you guys. And so Warren was instrumental in people making pots, making them for the common people. That was Yanagi's book, which, by the way, this is my notebook from 1968.
Oh, that's so cool.
And it's full of notes and quotes from Yanagi. And literally, it was my Bible back then. And I was married at the time to Michael Simon, and we believed this philosophy Warren had about you don't need a degree, just go out and make pots. He said, just do it, before Nike ever captured that. So we moved to Georgia, and we lived in a chicken coop with a dirt floor for 2 years and made pots, put our leach treadle wheels together that came from England, and sold them at Florida art fairs. And we felt rich if we made $500 in a weekend. And our rent was $30 a month, and we were able to continue and do that. And then in 1978, I was offered a teaching job at the Chicago Art Institute because they decided they needed women in their art program. And I was very ready and happy to move to the city, and I never went back to the country after that. There's a band in Berkeley called the Bobs, and they have a song that's called Once I Was a Hippie, Then I Was a Stockbroker, Now I Am a Hippie Again. Perfect. And my husband, Robert Brady, and I just bought a cabin on the St. Croix River, so it kind of fits my point in life. Anyway, in 1994, I saw, after many struggles with trying to have work in galleries and how they never responded properly and they took 50%, I decided to open Trax Gallery because we had a large warehouse in Berkeley where we lived, and that was to represent functional pottery, which was totally missing in the gallery world. And I wanted to showcase people who were committed, had made it their life's career in making pots. And I wanted to be responsive and pay them and not lose their work and not break their work and just tell them when I got their work. And I've done that. And now it's changed radically. And at that time, it was all to honor this responsibility about having work for the common people, for everyday people. And I wanted to honor the work that Warren made and sell it very inexpensively. And that's hard to do with a gallery. And I was on the other side of it for a long time, very resentful of gallery owners who took 50%. Now that I've had Trax for almost 25 years, I really need more than 50%. There's so many expenses people don't realize. And with the internet and the online sales and the inability to hire help to handle all this for me, and my husband, Robert, has been really helpful in packing work and sending work. And it's at a point now where the Mingei has really fallen back. The new generation of young women, they are not humble, and they are not about to not exercise their power in terms of getting their work out there. And I honor that, but at the same time, I want to be a hippie again. And that's it. Thank you.
Rhonda Willers, who I'm delighted to see here.
Well, thank you. Again, all the sentiments that people have expressed of gratitude, and especially to be a part of this lineage with these women up here, it's very moving and humbling, and I sometimes am like, oh. So, but what I came to Mingei as a student that was a double major in English education and horticulture. And I came and took a class with Randy Johnston. I had a friend that said, let's do this. And I said, okay. And then when I came into that room and the way that he taught and the language that he used to describe process, how we touch the material, how the material process marks are shown and celebrated, it was like a language that aligned with the way I had been raised. I was raised in a similar way, it sounds like to Linda, in the country, appreciating natural items, natural things around me. The observation was the important thing. And then when I came to read The Unknown Craftsman as an undergraduate, I found yet another language that just showed me even more about the way that I could articulate how I observed the things around me and then bring that into the art that I make. And repetition was part of that. Pattern was part of that. Materiality is part of that. And while I don't make functional work in the sense of what Mingei kind of looks like, I still adopt that process of repetition that Maren talked about, repeating the tiny pinch pot forms. The touch of the material with my hand is important to me, and then working with terra sigillatas so that that even heightens that touch even more. And what I wanted to end with is a little story from The Unknown Craftsman that kind of articulates the conceptual part of what I think about. It's short-ish. So it comes from the chapter on irregularity. Once there were 3 people who took a walk in the country. They happened to see a man standing on a hill. One of them said, "I guess he is standing on the hill to search for lost cattle." "No," said the second, "I think he is there trying to find a friend who has wandered off somewhere." Whereas the third said, "No, he is simply enjoying the summer breeze." As there was no definite conclusion, they went up the hill and asked him, "Are you searching for stray cattle?" "No," he replied. "Are you looking for a friend?" "No," again. "Are you enjoying the cool breeze?" "No," yet again. "Then why are you standing on the hill?" "I am just standing," was the answer.
So I'm sure others did this as well, but I jotted down a few ideas that came up in the course of the presentations, and I thought I would just list them and then open the floor to whatever anyone wants to say. But I thought, for the sake of the fact that we're being videoed and FaceTimed, is that right? That might be useful. So not in order of importance, but in the order in which I heard them, in terms of the idea of Mingei, surrounding oneself with handmade objects. Mingei can be in the city as well as the country. The connection to culture, broadly construed and thought about. I think, as Linda put it, a way of seeing, a link between daily life and art. And last but not least, the notion that over the course of the generations, as Sandi pointed out, Sandi used the word power, that women are connecting their Mingei practice to the concept of power. So I want to thank the panelists again for sharing and open the floor to comments, but particularly questions. We have this unique opportunity to hear further from the artists. So I will just recognize you. Are there mics out? Yes, thank you. So if you'll raise your hand if you have a question you want to ask. Yes, sir.
Hello, everybody. I like to challenge language, and in my understanding of Mingei and the Unknown Craftsman, I'm curious of how an object made out of the idea of being presented to a group of people for, the sake of this common purpose that has to be served with this very, humble object. How could an art object that is made for something other than this very common utility be seen as Mingei, like something other than like this craft object? I'm just kind of like, in my mind, it's really like that craft object and its origin that makes it that. So I was just curious, I know Maren's work is close and I love your work, but I want to challenge it and see what you have to say to kind of combat how it really fits into that original narrative.
Well, so in terms of there's obviously, I think my work now functions as embellishment and a tool of transforming space. In fact, that's kind of my intent, to transform one's perception of a space. So how a wall installation redefines an interior room. And, then in the regard of the object itself, it's for me, really the idea of the practice and how it's made and the materiality. So I think I also learned by reading the essays in the catalog, really a broader idea even of Mingei, which in my mind was initially more tighter and more focused around the unknown craftsman and the Leach philosophy. So I don't know if that's enough explanation for you, but it was like almost a freedom for me to realize, wait a minute, you can really take this idea of the Mingei and how it relates to the maker to any object that is handmade and brings beauty to one's lives.
Others want to comment? Sandy?
I'd like to say that I think Mingei is a thing of the past. I think we've all left it behind, and you can hold it in your heart, but frankly, money plays into it big time, and you have to make money, and Mingei isn't about that. Although I was really shocked to read what you sent us from the curator at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art wrote about Mingei, and she said the Mingei were responsible for bombing Pearl Harbor. And I went, what? How did that happen? And it wasn't attributed to any one person, but she said it in regard to how the Mingei movement in Japan had moved forward or backward, but gathered more speed, gathered more intellectuals, gathered a certain political base. That didn't happen here, really. You know, Mingei, when I had tracks in the beginning, people would come in the gallery and they go, oh, these are Mingei soda pots. And it was said with a sneer, and it wasn't respected. And I think it's come full circle, because it is now again. And what they meant by that was everybody lived in the country, everybody fired with wood, everybody had brown pots. And they didn't sign their work, which Martha Vida, who has Mark's project, makes her roll over in her present state, no doubt. And of course, having tracks and selling Warren's pots and the ones that he didn't sign, lots of times they were sent back to me. So it's changed.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the evolution of language, Maren, so I appreciate that answer. But Sandy, thank you. It's dead once you sign your work, I think, and people know, like, it takes away from the unknown potter. Everybody wants to be known, or making work to kind of be known as this thing. I think the origin is kind of deceased. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Others? Yes, ma'am. Of course, and let us get you the mic so we can hear you.
I'm sorry, I think you have interesting things to say, but I just want to point out that tomorrow at 10:45 I'll be showing a historical film of Anda when Leach and Yanagi and Hamada went to visit there, and then with an update with one of the young people you'll see is 15 there as 80 talking about that period. And as films are rather factual in presentation as much as one can be, I think it might be interesting for you. And then at noon we'll be showing 4 films. The first one is Warren he did a film in 53 at the Leach Pottery, and with a voiceover of explaining who's who and techniques and little anecdotes about Bernard Leach, etc. And then one on the Mingei potters of the Ongi potters of Korea, then the Mingei potters of Okinawa, and then a little conversation in English with Hamada, which is a revelation.
Wonderful.
But to your point, which is rather interesting, the role of women in the Mingei movement, which you'll see in the film, very, very limited role, and how that's changed, and how it's changed with in the case of Anda, that they had no access to iron oxide or very little access. Straw and wood ash was very expensive because it was produced in a different fashion in the wood mills. So there are lots of things to discuss in terms of how something that is old, 300 years old, can or cannot go into the present. And there used to be 10 villages in Onda, and there are now about 6 that are able to make a living economically, etc. So.
Thank you. Yes, I'm happy to. Yes, ma'am. Let's get the mic to you right here.
My name is Sheila Sato, and I am a cross-cultural artist. I did my training as a visual artist equally in Japan as an apprentice to a Zen calligrapher and in the West in watercolor, and now make handmade books, so I speak from that perspective. But I find a couple of interesting things coming up that what I'm hearing is that most of the panelists' connection with Mingei is through a deep relationship with either Warren Mackenzie or people influenced by him. And that it was that transmission through relationship, through embodied contact, being in a body with another person doing a practice together. That aspect of Mingei is alive. It will continue to be alive. However, I've also heard the phrase Mingei as an idea, a disembodied idea, an idea that perhaps was picked up and tossed aside superficially in some context, as perhaps the person who came to your gallery. Ideas come and go, they're fast. They will disappear. But embodied relationships, when we stay with the materials, when we stay with each other, the spirit that guides that work and manifests itself in all cultures is still present. Sometimes it's called Mingei, sometimes it's called other things. But Mingei, the literal translation is of the arts, gei, coming from people, of the people. That will exist as long as there are human beings who acknowledge their creative spirit.
Thank you. You know, related to what you said, there were a couple of expressions that people mentioned when they were talking earlier about referring to my own work ethic and my own personal history, and I think that intimately relates to your comments. I want to push, what is that expression? Push the envelope a little bit and make sure we engage on the topic about women and Mingei, because I think that's our particular assignment today and hopefully going forward. And in that context, and those of you who know me won't be surprised to hear me say this, and as has already been mentioned, the tradition has been following men and I wouldn't say worshiping, but being very engaged with what those men do and how they live and what they do. And so I want to make sure that if there are comments or questions here to these women who have done such great work and are role models for all of us about how women can work in this community and be admired and powerful as well. So here, Anne.
I'm curious, as an artist and a woman artist myself, what with the broad generational display we have, and thank you so much for being here. What changes have been most poignant and relevant for you as a woman artist in your experience? What hardships and what have you seen come about through revolution and through working on equity, being a woman artist and being a woman potter? I'm curious, what's the most poignant, difficult thing that you've had to come against with regards to misogyny or sexism within the field?
Margaret looks ready to speak.
Well, first you asked, what's changed? And I have to say, coming from academia, not enough has changed. Right. I just had a conversation with Rhonda, and 15 or 20 years ago, I was in a position at the University of Minnesota, first woman who taught in the ceramics program there, only person who was never tenure track there, and was strongly encouraged not to apply for a tenure track position. Rhonda was just recently passed over for a job at an institution where she had taught for many, many years. And both positions were given to men. So not that much has changed, at least in the last 10 or 15 years.
Others want to comment on this?
I would add, I never had one female teacher in college or art school. I did have a FIED requirement, and there was There was a Fayed teacher that was a woman, but that was the only woman. I never had any female teachers. And now when I am a visiting artist at colleges and universities, there are women teachers. I don't know much about money or any of that. But.
Well, I do have to say that I did have really strong female role models. My teachers were women. I went to Rhode Island School of Design and studied under Jackie Rice, and then I went to LSU and studied under Kate Blacklock. And I now teach at the University of Nebraska. That program, which is a great program, was built by Gail Kendall. So my role models were all women.
That's changed.
Yeah.
That's changed. That's a big change.
Yeah. So 80s to today, I was able to always work with women, which I'm happy about.
In my experience having tracks, women from Japan would come and seek an apprenticeship. Someone, not me necessarily, but someone in the United States, because the men wouldn't take them on. And I also have a doctor I've known for a long time as an acupuncturist, and he said in the 70s he went to China to study acupuncture, and there are often female babies dead along the road. They just threw them away. So we've come a long way.
Rhonda?
I just want to add about my learning, and I feel really fortunate because I had Jan and Maren both as informal mentors, I feel like, through my time at River Falls in ceramics, and both were incredibly generous with their conversations and welcoming to me at any time. I can remember talking to Maren in the studio at night after she taught an adjunct course. And then also having continued studio visits with both of them. And that was really incredibly informative. And then when I went to the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, I had Gail Kendall there. And that was the first time that I had a very forceful female mentor as a ceramics instructor in that way. The one thing I still never had, however, was a female mentor who was a mother of young children. And as a person who has 3 young children, ages 8 and under, it was hard to know how to navigate that myself as an adjunct too. And so I think that was something I held as being very important, to not only pass a lineage of tradition of making, but also a process of how do you work professionally, be a mother, teach as well, especially with younger children.
So one of the issues related to this, just one second, that comes up is, frequently in other professions, and I want to make sure we get to it, is this notion of women practicing together, so that was mentioned here, and whether there are habits and processes that women engage in differently, whether in the course of teaching or making, and whether there are, so to speak, sex-linked behavior patterns that ought to be promoted as women advance, or is it the case that as women advance and realize that it's a competition and there's only one person at the top of whatever pinnacle, they become more like the men around them. So I want to throw that idea out, and I also want to recognize the person who had her hand up. Yes. There's a mic to your left.
Thanks. I just wanted to first say that I think until we realize that we need to support both men and women in things like family leave, there really will never be gender equality. So not only do we need to hire women, we also need to make sure that everyone can take time to deal with their young children. I also have an 8-year-old. I was wondering if anyone had a specific connection to the feminist art movement, maybe specifically people who were working in the 70s and 80s. And did you ever feel a connection to that movement, and did you feel that it helped at all or seeped into the ceramics world or not?
Linda?
I could speak a little bit to that. There, in Minneapolis, there was, I don't know if they're still organized at all, but there was something called WHAM.
Yes.
Warm.
Right, exactly.
Warm. No, well, there's wham and warm and warm wham. Warm, okay. So I went to a few meetings, and this is a long time ago, like in the 70s, when I went there for a few meetings, and you were to take your work and talk, and I just felt like I was in the wrong place with pottery, with this. They weren't too interested in talking about this, so I just sort of left.
I would say as a collector that I came to collecting pottery in part because my mother loved studio pottery and took us to classes, my sister and I, when we were young. But she also taught us how to sew, she taught us how to cook, she also taught us to be independent women. And I think the thing about it, as I came into college, and there are a number of us of the same age, Linda and I, for instance, the women's movement came along, right? We read Sisterhood is Powerful in 1970 or so. And there were also groups in Chicago like those here. And for me, as a women's advocate, it was a very conscious choice to collect the work of women. And I think that what probably needs to keep happening because of the disparities that still exist, as we've talked about here, and Margaret alluded to, is to be advocates for women's work. It does not mean you can't collect other work. Most of us have, but I think it's really important that unless we put forth this idea that the feminist art movement exists, because, and Lyndall and I have talked about this at length, how poorly women are represented in most museums and in too many personal collections. It's really important that each of us take on this advocacy role in the way that we can. So I would say, to answer your question, I'm probably not the only one, but I have very consciously chosen for upwards of 3 decades, thanks to Lil Street for starters, for showing me the work of Linda and Margaret and Linda Sikora and others, that was actually something I could do. Are there other questions? Yes.
So I apprenticed under a woman community potter, like I would call her a village potter. She would never come to Nsika, but so I'm kind of wondering, and she's actually having kind of a hard time making a living as a potter anymore. And so I'm wondering, like, how the heck do you make a living as like a potter for and of the people? How do you be humble and still not like starve? Or do you? Like, what are your tips and tricks for making it?
It's always been difficult, and I don't think that's changed. There's a lot more potters now, and there's a lot more people making. And one of Unagi's quotes, or Bernard Leach's, that I have in my little book here is, you have to have a capacity for self-examination, and if you don't, your work will never be good. And so you have to start from the inside. And that has to be the primary goal, to make good work. And eventually, it will be recognized as such. And you can wait tables in the meantime.
Yes, ma'am. Let's get the mic to you.
Could Linda wanted to say
something. Linda, please.
Yeah, Linda does this.
Makes a living.
Yes, that's a good point. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll be brutal about it. That's an excellent question, Sadie. And I just had an incredible wake-up call because my daughter just graduated from the University of Minnesota and just got her first job. And she already, her starting salary is more than I make in a year. So that's a real wake-up call. And I think I've kind of been in another world, but I don't know, it's really difficult. I think I really did inherit the Mackenzie inexpensive pot notion, and that's been really a burden, and I've been really reluctant to change that. And Clara Ilian is another one that has stayed there. And I just raised my prices, and it was very, very difficult to do. It was very difficult to do. I find it really excruciating to do that. But I thank the University of Minnesota for educating my daughter, who my daughter is often my main teacher. But it's very, very difficult. And I mentioned some of the early challenges I had. My goal was to just get out and make some stuff. That was my business plan, was just get to work, keep my head down, hide. I wanted to hide, really. Just work, never speak in public, just work. And that was pretty good for a while. But I went to the bank to get a loan. There was a U.S. government low-interest home improvement loan, a wonderful program, and I thought, hey, that's me. So I went there, and I got turned down by the banker, and he said to me, you can't have this low-interest loan that is for low-income people because you don't make enough money. And I think now it was because I was a woman and I had an audacious plan to move a house, which I'd moved 3 houses. Anyway, I thought I'll never go in that bank again. But in a way, it has to do with opportunity. So making, to me, has to do with seeing, of course, seeing, like you're talking about, Sandi, or what did you say, responsibility to try to see and make better work. Seeing, improving skill, combined with curiosity and opportunity. So those 4 things together would propel one to make better work for oneself. But opportunity for women, I think, is a big factor. I mean, this is like a topic for about a week-long
We're
conference.
just starting with this conversation, absolutely. I think there's time maybe for one more question. Is anyone? Yes, over here? Or, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry, you were going to say something. I apologize.
Yeah, I'm very, very happy to be present
We're glad
in
you're
this
here.
reunion. And it is not only about ceramics, and it is not only about Mingei.
Right.
I'm hearing, and I'm very happy to hear that, about problems individuals are facing. And at this space, we hear about problems that women potters are facing.
Right.
I am going to turn now into the Mingei because I got to know Warren in 2008, and at 2011, as a photographer, I asked him if I can come to go and photograph him, and he asked me, why would you want to do that? And I did not answer. I was asking for permission. And he told me that he did not want to, when he was working, he was concentrating in what he was doing, and he was not a talker. So I had convinced myself that I was going to be, in silence, a person that was going to photograph what I thought was essential in me, the photographer, in what I was seeing. And words are very, very important, but observation for me is very essential. So coming back to Mingei, what I observed and I got out of my first experience was observing a Mingei person to work.
Right.
And in silence. And then we had a dinner at my house with a few people, and there was also a male artist, a sculptor, a Chinese person, and there was a little fight. The fight was about Mingei. And the Chinese person is, what is the blah, blah, blah? Mingei is a philosophy. That's all there is. And the last time I saw Warren, he said to me, I think I'm failing. I say, why are you saying that? And he said, because I'm producing less. That was in November. I'm producing less than what I used to produce. And I said, do you know anybody that can make as many pots in one day? He said, no. Then I said, you are okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to take the last minute we have and respect the fact that we all want to see this fabulous exhibit, and that perhaps if the artists can stay with us for a while, we can talk with them further. Just in closing, thanks again to everyone for being here, for starting this conversation, which, as Linda pointed out, could go on for weeks and weeks, and we hope it will over the course of the years to come and with many NCECA programs. So thank you all for being here. See you around over the next few days, and don't forget to pick up your literature at the registration table and go to the gift shop and get these wonderful books that Lyndall has shared with us. Thank you.